The ballroom roared 2 floors above her like a sea heard through a wall, and the Duke of Harcourt stood in the doorway of the workroom, watching her needle go into the ivory silk, and he did not say a word. Marianne Ashby felt him before she saw him. It had begun to happen, and she could not explain it to herself, this awareness of him. This sense that a room grew warmer at one edge when he entered it. She kept her eyes on the seam. A threaded needle rose and fell in her hand, silver catching the light of the single candle at her elbow, and a long fold of her sister's bridal silk lay pooled across her lap like spilled cream. She did not look up. She had learned, in 24 years of being the plain one. That looking up was how a girl gave herself away. "You are not dancing, Your Grace," she told the silk. "They will miss you. They will survive it." His voice came low and unhurried, and she heard him step over the threshold, one boot and then the other on the old boards, and the candle flame leaned as if it too turned toward him. "That is not an answer," she said. "It is the only one I have. There is a great crush of people upstairs, and every one of them wishes to be seen by me, and I find I cannot bear to be looked at for one more minute. So I have come to the one place in the house where nobody is looking at anything at all. Someone is working, Your Grace. That is a different thing from no one looking." "No," he agreed, "it is better." She permitted herself one glance. He was exactly as the whole of London described him, and exactly as no one had prepared her for. He was tall enough that he had to stoop under the workroom lintel, his dark hair a little disordered as though he had run a hand through it climbing down, and his eyes were the gray of a storm coming in over the downs, fixed on her with an attention that had nothing polite in it. His black evening coat was immaculate, his cravat a fall of white at his throat, and he was standing in a servant's back room that smelled of tallow and pressing cloth, like a man perfectly certain of his welcome. "You have run away from 100 people who would give an eye tooth for a minute of your notice," Marianne said, "to stand in a sewing room and watch a woman hem." "I have. Why? I told you. They tire me. They tire everyone, Your Grace. Most men of your rank simply drink until they stop noticing. They do not come below stairs to loiter in a sewing room and be scolded by a stranger. You are not scolding me. I am about to. Sit down or go up. You are blocking my light, and I have a hem to finish before morning, and the bride cannot be married in a gown with a raw edge. Whatever you great people may think of us small ones." To her astonishment, he sat. He drew out the low stool by the pressing board, folded his long frame onto it like a man who had done such things all his life, and watched her hands. "Better?" he said. Marginally, she set another stitch. Her thumb pressed flat against the cloth, hard, so that the small cost of him did not show in her fingers. He did not know, he could not know, that she had counted, this past fortnight, the number of times he had appeared like this in the low doorway, drawn down out of the light and the music to the one place nobody was meant to look. It was 7 times now. She had counted because counting was safer than hoping. A woman in dove gray did not hope. A woman in dove gray threaded needles and solved the small disasters that the beautiful people above never even learned had happened, and she was glad of the work, and she asked for nothing, because asking was how a person discovered exactly how little she was owed. "The bride is looking for you," she said. "My sister. Cordelia. She will want you to admire her before the toast. I have admired your sister. She is very beautiful. She is aware of it in the manner of a girl who has been told so at every breakfast of her life." He was quiet a moment. "May I say a thing you will dislike?" "You will say it, regardless." You are a duke. I would rather watch something that is not aware of me at all." Marianne's needle stopped. For one moment, the roar above them and the small wet spit of the candle were the only sounds in the world, and she understood, with the cold, clean certainty of a woman who has never in her life been wrong about her own disadvantages, that the Duke had not come down these stairs for air. He had come for her. And she understood a second thing, which frightened her more: that he did not yet have a name for it either, that he was sitting on a laundry stool at midnight because it was the only place he could breathe, and that a man like this, when he finally found the name, was going to be very dangerous to a woman who had nothing. "You should not say such things to me," she said, and looked back at the silk. "Why not?" "Because I am the seamstress, your Grace, and you are the guest of honor, and there is a whole world of distance between those two facts, and everyone in that room upstairs knows the exact measure of it, even if you have chosen to forget it for an evening. You may say such things to a duchess's daughter. You may not say them to me. It costs you nothing, and it could cost me everything, and a gentleman knows the difference." He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, some of the idle warmth gone out of it, replaced by something more careful. "You are right," he said. "Forgive me. I have spent so long being told what I wish to hear that I have grown clumsy at telling anyone the truth. I will practice on the hem instead. What is that stitch called? The small slanting one you do at the fold?" "A fell stitch. It hides the raw edge inside itself so that the seam looks finished from both sides." "Hides it inside itself," he repeated. "So the ugly part is turned in where it cannot be seen, and the outside is smooth. That is my whole trade, your Grace. Turning the ugly part in." "It sounds," said Harcourt slowly, "like a great deal of the ugliness never gets out at all. It only lives inside the seam, where no one thinks to look." She gave him no answer to that. She could not. She set her stitches one after another, small and slanting and perfect, and she was glad the single candle was not bright enough to show her face. To understand how a plain woman in a grey gown came to be sewing in a back room while the whole of fashionable London drank champagne over her head, you must understand the arithmetic of the Ashby family, which was the arithmetic of most genteel families with more name than money and one daughter too many. There had been, in the beginning, 2 Ashby girls. Cordelia was the younger by 3 years, and the family's whole fortune, though not a shilling of it sat in any bank. She was fair where Marianne was dark, rounded and dimpled where Marianne was thin, and gifted from the cradle with a loveliness that made strangers stop in the street. When Cordelia entered a room, the room arranged itself around her. When Marianne entered a room, she was generally already carrying something for Cordelia. Their mother, Mrs. Ashby, had grasped the situation early and managed it without cruelty and without mercy, which is a harder thing to bear than either alone. She dressed Cordelia in white muslin and blue ribbons, and she dressed Marianne in dove gray, because gray did not draw the eye. And the entire strategy of the household was that no eye should ever be drawn from Cordelia to anyone else. "You are the clever one," her mother had told her more than once, in a tone that made cleverness sound like a consolation prize handed to a child who had not won the true one. "Cordelia will make the match, and you will help her keep the house running, and we shall all do very well together." That was the plan. Marianne had been raised inside it, as a bird is raised inside a cage it has never once seen the outside of, and she had made her peace, or she believed she had, which is not always the same thing. And she was clever. That was the joke of it, the joke that nobody in the family found funny. Marianne could cut a gown from a length of cloth with nothing but her eye for a pattern. She could take a torn flounce that would have cost 3 guineas to replace and make it whole again, so that no living soul could find the mend. She kept the household books in a hand so neat the tradesmen never dared cheat her. She remembered every quarrel between every cousin, and she could seat 40 people at a wedding breakfast so that no 2 enemies faced each other across the linen. She was, in every practical sense, the reason the Ashbys had not sunk into ruin years ago, and she was invisible. Because a family climbing toward a great marriage does not advertise that its ladder is built of a spinster daughter's unpaid hands. When Cordelia captured the affection of Mr. Julian Wexford, second son of a baron, with a very great deal of money and a very small amount of chin, the family understood that this was the moment everything had been for. The wedding must be magnificent. It must be talked of. It must announce to London that the Ashbys had arrived. And there was no money at all to hire the small army of people such a wedding required. So there was Marianne, doing the work of all of them for nothing, in a back room, by one candle, while the guests she had personally seated danced above her head. You do see, her mother had said to her a week before, folding and unfolding her hands, that it would be awkward, your appearing much at the wedding itself. People ask questions. A grown unmarried sister, older than the bride, no settlement, no prospects. It invites talk. And Cordelia's day must be perfect. She had not been able to meet her daughter's eyes. You understand. You always do. I understand, Mama, Marianne had said. Because she did. And because there was no profit in saying anything else. So she kept to the workroom. And into that workroom, 7 times now, had come the coldest and most sought-after man in England, and that she did not understand at all. The wedding was set for a Thursday in late autumn, and the great town house on Grosvenor Street had been turned inside out to receive it. Marianne had been living there a fortnight, in a small room under the eaves, and she had made the entire vast machine of the event turn on the strength of her own 2 hands. She had first properly spoken to the Duke on the second of these evenings, though she had known his name from the moment he arrived. Everyone in London knew the name. He was 35, unmarried, in possession of an estate as broad as a small county, and famous chiefly for a coldness so complete that mothers had begun to stop throwing their daughters at him, not from despair, but from a kind of animal instinct for self-preservation. Some tie of guardianship connected him to the groom's family. The point of it was that they had secured him as their principal guest, and his mere attendance had turned an ordinary good marriage into the event of the season. She had been on her knees pinning the hem of Cordelia's gown at the time, her mouth full of pins, when he had walked into the small parlor they were using for fittings. Looking for the groom and finding instead a bride on a stool and her plain sister crouched at her feet like a servant. Out, Cordelia had cried, laughing, delighted to be caught mid-splendor. You are not permitted to see any of this. Your Grace, it is desperately unlucky. She had turned this way and that on the stool so the candlelight ran down the silk, though, since you are here, is it not the most beautiful thing you have ever set eyes on? The Duke had looked at the gown. Then he had looked down, at the woman on the floor with pins in her mouth and a paper of patterns pinned to her sleeve and a smudge of chalk along her wrist, and he had said, "Who made it?" Cordelia had blinked. It was made. What does it matter who? Is it not lovely? It matters to me who made a thing before I decide whether it is lovely. That is a very strange principle, Your Grace. I have found it a reliable one. And he had looked at Marianne again, longer this second time, and Marianne had taken the pins out of her mouth one by one and said, in a perfectly level voice, "I made it. Every stitch. I should be glad if you would leave now, as my sister says it is unlucky, and I have a great deal still to do before the light goes. She had expected him to be affronted. Men of his rank were affronted by a gray woman on the floor telling them to leave. Instead, something had moved behind the storm gray eyes, some flicker she could not name, and he had bowed, actually bowed, a small, precise inclination, and said, "Forgive the intrusion." "Your name?" "Ashby. Marianne Ashby. Miss Ashby," he had said, as though setting it down somewhere he intended to keep it, and gone out. And Cordelia had laughed and said wasn't he peculiar, and had never thought of him again. But Marianne had knelt on the floor with the pins in her hand, and had felt, absurdly, seen, for the first time in a very long while, and had been angry at herself for the feeling all the rest of that night. He came back the next evening. She was in the workroom then, the little back chamber off the kitchen passage that she had claimed as her headquarters, its long deal table covered in trailing lengths of tissue and lace, the seating plan drawn out in her own hand, a pincushion the size of a fist bristling like a hedgehog. She was working late because the flowers had arrived wrong, and she was redrawing the entire scheme, and she looked up, and he was in the doorway. "You are lost, Your Grace," Marianne remarked without looking up. "The company is the other way." "I am not lost." He came in without being asked, which no gentleman would do, and stood over her table and looked at the seating plan with a frown of genuine attention. "Why is Lady Bexley here and not beside her husband?" Marianne was surprised into an honest answer. "Because Lady Bexley and her husband have not spoken in 11 years, and if I sit them together the whole table will spend the breakfast watching them not speak, and no one will remember anything of the day but that. So I have put Sir Henry beside the deaf dowager, who will not notice that he says nothing, and Lady Bexley beside the vicar, who talks enough for two. Everyone will be comfortable, and no one will know I arranged it. No one will know," he repeated. "You do all this labor, and the design of it is that it should be invisible. That is the entire art of it, Your Grace. To be the reason a thing goes well, and to leave no fingerprint on it anywhere. And you do this for your sister's wedding. You will get no credit for a moment of it." "Credit is not what it is for." "Then what is it for?" She looked up at him. It was a real question. He was not being cruel. He genuinely did not know. A man to whom the world had given everything had no map at all for a person who gave and was never repaid. "It is so that my sister has a good day," she said, "and my mother is happy, and the family does well. It is for the doing of the thing itself. Some of us do not require to be at the center of the picture, Your Grace. Some of us are content to hold the frame around it. I do not believe you are content." The candle spat. Marianne set down her pen. "You do not know me well enough to say what I am." "No," he said, and took the rebuke without flinching, and she watched it land somewhere behind the gray eyes and be, of all things, welcomed. He was so unused to being told anything true. She saw it then, that here was a man starved, in the middle of a life of plenty, for a single person who would not perform for him, who would not simper or angle or arrange her face into whatever he wished to see. And she was that person, because she had never once in her life had the luxury of performing for anyone. Her honesty was not a strategy. It was simply what was left over when a woman had nothing else to trade. "You are the strangest man I have ever met," she said. "I have been called cold. You are not cold. You are hungry. It is not the same thing, though I imagine it looks identical from the outside, and I imagine nobody has ever troubled to tell the difference between the two." He went very still. "No," he said at last. "No one ever has." "Well, She picked up her pen again, because she did not know what else to do with a silence like that. Now, someone has. You may go up now, Your Grace. You have had your truth for the evening. You have a repair to make to that flounce there, he said, not moving. It is pulling at the left. She looked. He was right. Of course he was right. He missed nothing. This man, it was half of what made him frightening. You have an eye, she said grudgingly. I have an eye for things that are almost right and not quite, said Harcourt, and he was not looking at the flounce when he said it, and they both knew it, and neither of them said one word more. He came back the evening after that, and the one after that, and each time he found some reason, and each time the reason was thinner than the last, and each time she let him stay. She told herself it was because a duke could not be ordered out of a house that was hosting his presence as its chief ornament. This was a lie, and she knew it. She let him stay because the hours in the workroom were the only hours of her life in which she was not invisible. And a starving person does not turn away bread merely because she knows it is not hers to keep. They talked. That was the strange and dangerous thing. They talked as she had never talked to anyone, over the pinning and the cutting and the endless mending, hour upon hour while the household slept and the great work of the wedding took shape under her fingers. Tell me about the estate, she said one night, because it was easier to ask about him than to be asked about herself. It is very large and very cold and very empty. My brother had it before me. He was the one raised to it, groomed for it, told from the cradle it would be his. I was the spare. I was meant for the church, or the army, or nothing much at all. And then? And then he took a fever at 29 and was dead in a week, and I inherited a thing I had been raised specifically not to want. And a house full of servants who had loved him and could not think what to make of me, and I have spent 12 years being the wrong brother in the right chair. He said it flatly, as a fact, without any bid for pity, and Marianne, who understood better than anyone alive what it was to be the spare, felt something turn over. So we are the same, you and I, she said. The one who was not the point, the one kept in reserve, in case the true one broke. He was quiet a while, studying her. Yes, he said. I suppose we are. I had not thought of it. Nobody ever put it to me so plainly, that I was the spare. They only ever treated me as though I were, and called it something politer. People are always politer than the truth, said Marianne. It is how they get away with things. You are not. I cannot afford to be. Politeness is a luxury. Your Grace, like white muslin and blue ribbons, it is for people who have something to protect. I have nothing to protect, so I may as well say what is true, and it turns out that is the one thing you have never been able to buy, for all your county-sized estate, and so here you are, at midnight, in a laundry, listening to a spinster tell you that you are not cold, but hungry. It is very funny, when you think of it. It is not funny at all, he said quietly. It is the first true conversation I have had in 12 years. She did not answer that. She bent over her work and set her stitches, and she did not tell him that it was the first true conversation she had ever had in her whole life, because some truths a woman must keep for herself, turned in where they cannot be seen, hidden inside the seam. There was a night, midway through the fortnight, when the great house went wrong all at once in the small hours, and it was Marianne, of course, who set it right. And it was the Duke, of all people, who watched her do it, and learned something he had not known he lacked. A kitchen boy came running to the workroom near 1 a.m, white and stammering, because the cook had scalded her hand badly and could not finish the sugar work for the wedding, and the housekeeper had taken to her bed with a megrim. and the underservants were standing about the kitchen in a helpless knot with a great wedding 2 days off and no one to tell them what to do. Marianne put down her needle and went, and the Duke, who had been in his usual corner, rose and followed her without being asked. He stood in the kitchen doorway and watched her work. She did not shout. She did not wring her hands. She dressed the cook's burn herself, with butter and clean linen, talking low and steady the whole while so the woman stopped weeping. Then she turned to the knot of frightened servants and, in the space of about 4 minutes, gave each of them one clear thing to do, by name, in an order that made sense, so that the panic drained out of the room like water out of a pulled bath. She sent the boy for more sugar. She set the 2 housemaids to the molds under her eye. She promised the cook her place was safe and her wages whole, and that no one would hear a word of the accident, and she meant it, and the woman believed her. And within the quarter hour the kitchen was a working kitchen again, and not a small disaster. "How did you do that?" the Duke asked her when it was done, as they climbed the back stair together toward the workroom. There were 8 frightened people in that room and no one in charge of any of them, and you walked in, and there was one person in charge, and it was you, and you never once raised your voice. "You do not raise your voice," said Marianne. "That is the whole trick of it, if you want the plain truth. Frightened people cannot think, and a raised voice frightens them worse, so you lower yours instead, until they have to grow quiet to hear you, and in growing quiet, they grow calm enough to do the next thing. Then you give them only the next thing. Not the whole mountain, just the next single step up it. A frightened person can always manage one step. It is the mountain that undoes them. My steward could not have done that. My steward, who I pay 400 a year, would have stood in that doorway and made a speech about duty. Your steward is paid to be obeyed, she said. He has never had to calm a kitchen in the dead of night with no authority but his own steadiness, because he has always had his wages and his office to stand behind. Authority you are given makes you lazy. Authority you must earn, breath by breath, in a room full of people who owe you nothing, makes you good. I am very good, Your Grace. It is the one thing in the world I am permitted to be, and so I have made myself very good at it indeed, and no one has ever thanked me, and I have long stopped expecting it, and that is very nearly the small sad sum of me, and now I should like to go back to my hem. He stopped, on the stair, 1 step below her, so that for once she looked down at him instead of up. I am thanking you, he said. It is not much. It is a thing you never asked for, and probably do not want from me. But I have watched a great many people be given a great deal in my life, and I have almost never watched anyone earn a single thing, breath by breath, in front of me, and be owed for it, and go unpaid, and bear it without a word of complaint. And I find I cannot let it go past unmarked one more time. Thank you, Marianne, for the kitchen, for the wedding, for all of it, the whole invisible mountain of it that no one will ever see. I see it. I have seen every step. She stood on the stair above him with her hand on the cold rail and could not speak, because in 24 years no one had ever once said such a thing to her. And she had told herself so many times that she did not need it, said that she had almost come to believe the lie, and here it was, said at 1 a.m. on a servant's stair, by the coldest man in England, who was not cold at all, and it undid her more thoroughly than any cruelty ever had. She turned and went up quickly, so that he would not see her face, and he let her go, and did not follow, and that, she thought later, was its own kind of kindness, the rarest kind, the kind that knows when to stop looking. The next night he was late, and when he came, He did not sit at once. He stood by the door a moment, and there was a tightness about his mouth that she had not seen before. "You have been made to sit beside someone this evening," she guessed. "Who wearied you past bearing. You are becoming a witch." "How did you know?" "Because you have the face of a man who has spent 3 hours being agreeable and has come down here to stop." "Who was it?" "A Miss Vane." He said the name with distaste. "Mrs. Wexford's niece. She was placed at my right hand at dinner, which was not an accident, and she laughed at everything I said, which was also not an accident, particularly as I said nothing whatever that was amusing. I counted. I made 4 remarks in the whole of dinner, each duller than the last, and she laughed at all 4, as though I were the wittiest man in Christendom." He shook his head. "It is exhausting, being lied to with the face. I would rather be insulted honestly." "Then you have come to the right shop." Marianne threaded a fresh needle without looking at it. "Shall I insult you honestly? You are vain, for a man who claims to hate flattery. If you truly hated it, you would not notice it so precisely." You counted her laughs. A man indifferent to admiration does not keep a ledger of it. He stared at her, and then, unexpectedly, he laughed, the real thing, short and surprised. "That is a hit. That is a palpable hit. God, you are merciless. You asked for it honestly. I gave it to you honestly. That is the bargain." She snipped a thread. "But you should be careful of Miss Vane, and more careful of her aunt, who placed her. Women like Mrs. Wexford do not spend a laughing niece on a man for nothing. She wants a duke in the family to go with the baron's son she has already secured. She is a collector, and you are the finest piece she has yet seen, and she will not give you up merely because you are dull at dinner. She will try again. She will try harder, and she will begin to wonder why the dullness only lifts when you are not in the room she has put her niece in. Let her wonder. No, your grace." Marianne set the needle down and looked at him directly, and her voice was quiet and serious now. "Do not say 'let her wonder' as though wondering were a harmless thing. A woman like that, when she wonders, she does not merely wonder. She looks. And when she looks, she finds. And when she finds a duke slipping below stairs every night of a fortnight, she asks herself what he is finding down there. And then she looks for the thing he is finding. And then, if the thing is a person, she decides what is to be done about the person. I know this. I have watched women like her arrange the lives of people smaller than themselves my whole life. You have never had to be the smaller person in any room. I have never been anything else. So believe me when I tell you, your wondering costs you nothing, and mine could cost me everything. And let her wonder is a rich man's answer to a poor woman's danger." The lightness went out of his face entirely. He came and sat, slowly, on the low stool, and for a while he did not speak. "You think I do not see it," he said at last. "The distance. The difference in what a thing costs you and what it costs me. You think me a careless man who has never had to count the cost of anything. I think you are a kind man who is never taught to count it. It is not the same fault, and it is not really a fault at all. It is only a kind of blindness that comes free with a great deal of money. Then teach me to see it. You have taught me everything else in a fortnight. Teach me that." "I cannot," she said. "It is not a thing that can be taught. It can only be lived, and you will never live it, and I would not wish you to. I would not wish this on anyone." She picked her needle back up. "Go to bed, your grace, and tomorrow sit somewhere Miss Vane is not, and be agreeable to a dozen people instead of dull to one, and give her aunt nothing to look at. Do that much for me, if you will not do it for yourself. I will do anything you ask me, he said, and it was not gallantry. It was said too plainly for gallantry. And it frightened her more than any pretty speech could have done. That is rather the difficulty. I have begun to find that I will do anything at all that you ask me, and I do not think you have any idea yet what a dangerous thing that is to have become true. She did not answer. She could not. She bent to her work, and he watched her, and neither of them said the thing that was in the room with them, and after a while he rose and went, and the candle burned lower, and she sat alone with the knowledge that she had told him to protect himself, and had said not one word about protecting her own heart, which was already, she understood, quite past protecting. On the 6th evening, she was cutting a length of ribbon with the great shears, and the ribbon slipped, and she reached to catch it, and his hand came down over hers on the shears. Neither of them moved. His hand was warm and heavy and entirely still, closed over the back of her fingers where they gripped the cold iron, and Marianne looked at it and did not breathe. 1 second, 2. She could feel the pulse in his palm against her knuckles. Quick. Quicker than a cold man's pulse had any business being. 3 seconds. The candle burned straight up between them without a flicker, as though the room itself held its breath along with her, and she raised her eyes and found his already on her face, and there was nothing cold in them at all. Nothing. Only a man looking at a woman as though she were the answer to a question he had been asking his entire life without ever knowing the words for it. "Your Grace," she managed. "Say my name," he said. "My given name. Not the title, just once. I do not know your given name. No one has ever told it to me. You have been the Duke in this house since the hour you arrived, and your Grace before that in every drawing room in London, and I do not think anyone here even remembers you were christened." Something crossed his face that was almost grief. "It is Alexander," he said. "I have not heard it spoken aloud by another living person in longer than I can readily count." "Alexander," she said. And he closed his eyes, briefly, as though she had done something to him, and then he took his hand away. "Forgive me," he said. His voice was not quite steady. "You were going to cut yourself. I was not. I have handled shears since I was 6. I do not cut myself, and you know that perfectly well, and it is a poor excuse for a man who prides himself on the truth." "It is a very poor excuse," he agreed. "It is the best I could manage. Marianne, I ought to tell you what I do not." She said it fast, before he could finish, before the thing could be said and could not be unsaid. "Please, do not say it. Your Grace, not here, not to me. You do not know what it would cost. And I do. I have done the arithmetic. I do nothing but arithmetic, and it comes out the same every way I run it. You will go back to that great cold county of yours, and I will be left with a name in ruins and a family disgraced on the very eve of the marriage they bled me white to make. So do not say it. Let it stay inside the seam, where it cannot hurt anyone." He stood back from the table. For a moment she thought he would say it anyway, whatever it was. The thing that had been building in the low warm room for 6 nights running, and she was terrified that he would, and equally terrified that he would not, and in the end he did neither. He looked at the pincushion, and the trailing silk, and the small candle, and at her, once, hard, and he said only, "Good night, Miss Ashby," and went out, and she sat for a long time afterward, with her hand pressed flat against the table where his had been, feeling the warmth of it fade, telling herself she felt nothing at all, and lying. She did not sleep that night. She lay under the eaves and ran the sums, because she was a woman who lived by sums. A duke. Herself, the plain Ashby, the grey one, 24. No settlement, no beauty, no name of her own. And a duke who could have any woman in England and had refused every one of them. It was not a story that ended anywhere but in her ruin. He might mean nothing more than a little warmth stolen in a cold season, and she would be the one left holding the shame of it. Or he might mean everything, and that was worse. Because a duke who meant everything toward a seamstress had a whole world ranged against him, and Marianne had watched the world win too many times to believe it would ever lose for her. She resolved, lying there, to send him away the next time he came. She was very good at resolving things. She had resolved not to hope so many times that resolving had itself become a kind of hoping. There was one thing she had not told him, and it was the thing she thought about most in the dark, because it was hers, and no one could take it from her. Years before, when she was 17 and the family still had a little money, the Ashby pearls had come back from the jeweler with a fault in the clasp. They were the one thing of value the family owned outright. A long single strand, old, creamy, meant to go one day to whichever daughter married best, which everyone quietly understood to mean Cordelia. The clasp had cracked, and there was no coin to send them back a second time, and Marianne, 17 and already defter with her hands than any tradesman in London, had mended it herself. She had done more than mend it. She had taken a fine thread of gold wire and worked a tiny reinforcement into the inside of the clasp, a small looping figure, like a knot or a flower. Invisible unless a person turned the clasp toward the light and knew precisely where to look. She had put a little of herself inside the one beautiful object the family had, in the only place it would never be seen. And she had never told a living soul. The pearls were to be worn by Cordelia at the wedding. They were kept, that fortnight, in a velvet case in Mrs. Ashby's dressing room, and Marianne had cleaned them herself a week before, turning the little gold clasp toward the candle, finding her own secret knot still there after 7 years, and feeling, she could not have said quite what, that some proof of her existed, that she had been real once, and had left a mark, even if the mark was hidden in a thing that would be worn by someone else at an event she was forbidden to attend. She thought of the pearls that sleepless night. She did not yet know they were about to save her life. Misty. Wexford, the groom, was a mild and harmless young man, but he came with a mother, and Mrs. Wexford was neither. Marianne had disliked her on sight, and had then been ashamed of disliking her on sight, and had then, over the fortnight, been slowly and thoroughly vindicated. The elder Mrs. Wexford was a handsome, hard, watchful woman who had married her own family up in the world and intended that her son should climb further, and who regarded the Ashbys with the particular contempt of a person who has clawed to a height and despises anyone still standing on the rung she has lately left behind. She had, in her own way, a genius for the family's arithmetic. She saw at once that the wedding was being run by the plain elder sister, and she filed the fact away, and she began, quietly, in 100 small remarks, to make it known that she found something not quite respectable in an unmarried woman of that age, with no visible occupation but her prettier sister's affairs. One does wonder, she had said at dinner, the 4th evening. Her eyes sliding to Marianne's grey sleeve, what becomes of such women, when the sister is married and gone, when there is no more use to be got from them. She had smiled a small, closed smile. I find they so often become a burden on a family. Or worse, idle hands, you understand. Marianne had said nothing. She had learned young that silence was the only armor that never once cracked. But there was a second reason the elder woman watched her, and Marianne worked it out only later, piecing it together as she pieced everything together. Mrs. Wexford had seen the Duke go down the back stairs. Not once, twice, 3 times. And Mrs. Wexford, who missed nothing where advantage was concerned, had a niece, a pale, sharp, ambitious girl named Miss Sophronia Vane, brought to the wedding for the express purpose of being set squarely in the Duke's path, and going precisely nowhere, because the Duke kept vanishing to a sewing room to watch a grey woman hem. Mrs. Wexford had come to London to catch a Duke for her niece and marry off her son in a single glorious fortnight, and she had discovered that a nobody in dove grey was quietly, without the least apparent effort, ruining half her plan. That was the thing about Marianne's invisibility. It had protected her all her life, and now, at the worst possible moment, it had failed her. She had been seen, and seen by the one person in the house with every reason to destroy her for it. She learned exactly how much she had been seen 2 nights before the wedding, when Mrs. Wexford came to the workroom herself. Miss Ashby. The older woman stood in the doorway where the Duke had stood, and filled it differently. You keep late hours. There is a great deal to do, Mrs. Wexford. A wedding does not arrange itself. No, it does not. It requires clever, quiet, industrious hands, and no one ever thinks to thank them, do they? How that must gall a proud woman. I am not proud, and I am not galled. I am tired, and I have 3 yards of him left. Was there something you wanted? Mrs. Wexford came in and let her gloved fingers trail along the deal table, over the patterns, over the pincushion, over the little velvet-lined tray where Marianne kept her finest needles. I wanted to give you a piece of counsel, she said, one practical woman to another, for I think we are more alike than you would care to admit. A woman without money or beauty has exactly one thing to sell, and that is her reputation for respectability. It is the only coin she has. Spend it foolishly. Be seen where she ought not to be seen. Keep company she has no business keeping, and she is left with nothing at all. Nothing. Do you take my meaning? Marianne set down her needle. I take it perfectly, she said. You have seen the Duke come down these stairs, and you wish me to understand that if I do not put a stop to it. You will find a way to make it cost me everything I have, which is not much, but is all of it. The older woman's smile did not waver, but her eyes went flat and cold. I would never say such a thing. No, you would only stand in a doorway at midnight and trail your fingers over my needles and speak of coins and reputations. I understand you, Mrs. Wexford. I have understood women like you my whole life. You need not draw me a diagram. Then we understand each other. Mrs. Wexford drew on her gloves more snugly. Good. See that the gown is ready. My son's bride must be perfect. That, after all, is what you are for. And she went out and left the door open behind her, so the cold came in off the passage. And Marianne sat in it a long time and understood that the trap had been set, and that she had walked into the fortnight not knowing it was there. On the morning of the wedding, the house woke before dawn and did not stop moving until it was over, and Marianne was at the center of every part of it and named in none. She dressed her sister. She pinned the veil and settled the pearls at Cordelia's throat, the long creamy strand, the clasp turned in against the nape where no one would see her secret knot, and she stood back and looked at Cordelia in the glass, radiant, weeping a little for joy, entirely beautiful, and she felt the old complicated love and the old complicated ache, and pressed them both flat. as she pressed everything flat. "You look happy," Marianne said. "You look exactly as a bride should look. I am happy." Cordelia caught her sister's hand and for a moment was 17 again and grateful. "You did all of this. I know you did all of it. Mama says I'm not to make a fuss of you today, but thank you, Anne. Truly, I don't know what any of us would ever do without you." "You would manage very well," said Marianne, and meant it, and squeezed her sister's fingers and sent her up the aisle. The ceremony went perfectly, because Marianne had arranged that it should. The breakfast that followed was laid in the great ballroom, 40 guests, the flowers she had rescued banked white against the walls. The seating exactly as she had planned it, so that no enemy faced an enemy and no one was bored, and she stood at the back of the room near the servants' door, in dove gray, having been told she might watch from there so long as she stayed out of the way. She was tired to the marrow of her, and quietly, secretly content. It had gone well. She had made it go well. No one would ever know. And that was all right. That was what she was for. She saw the Duke across the room. He was not looking at the bride. He was looking, over the heads of 40 people, at the woman in gray by the door, and when their eyes met, he did not glance away, and Marianne felt the whole ballroom tilt very slightly on its axis. It was then that Mrs. Wexford rose to her feet and tapped a glass with a spoon and set out to destroy her. "Forgive me," said Mrs. Wexford in a carrying, pleasant voice, so that the room fell quiet and turned toward her, for interrupting so joyful an occasion. "But a thing has come to my notice that cannot wait, painful though it is, and I should never forgive myself if I let it pass in silence on this of all days." Marianne, by the door, felt the first cold touch of dread before she understood a single reason for it. "The Ashby pearls," Mrs. Wexford went on, "the family heirloom our dear bride wears at her lovely throat, are famous. A single strand, very old, very fine. I admired them only this morning." She let the pause stretch until it ached. "This afternoon, my own maid, in tidying the workroom below stairs, came upon this," and she held up, between finger and thumb, for the whole room to see. A single loose pearl, creamy, old, unmistakably matched to the strand at Cordelia's throat, and beside it, drawn from her reticule, a second thing that turned Marianne's blood to water. A fold of paper, one of Marianne's own pattern papers, and knotted through a corner of it, a short broken length of the very silk the pearls were strung upon. "It was in the sewing woman's basket," said Mrs. Wexford, "Miss Marianne Ashby's basket. Among her tools and her papers, in the room she has kept locked against the rest of us this whole fortnight." She turned, and 40 faces turned with her, toward the woman in gray at the back of the room. I make no accusation lightly, but a strand of pearls does not shed a pearl and a length of its own thread into a spinster's work-basket by pure accident. It seems our bride has been robbed, and robbed by her own sister. The silence that fell was the loudest thing Marianne had ever heard. She saw her mother's face go white, and then, horribly, uncertain, she saw the doubt cross it. She saw the arithmetic run behind her mother's eyes, the grown daughter, the no settlement, the no prospects, the idle hands. And she understood that her own mother was not entirely sure. She saw Cordelia's mouth fall open. She saw the groom's family close ranks like a shutting door. And she saw Mrs. Wexford watching her with a small, satisfied patience, waiting for the gray woman to weep, or shout, or crumple, or bolt, waiting for the guilt a frightened nobody always seems to perform when the powerful raise a finger against her. "A constable has been sent for," Mrs. Wexford added gently into the silence. "It seemed only proper. These things must be handled correctly. By dawn it will all be settled, one way or another." She smiled. "I am sure the family would rather it were kept quiet. A charge of theft. At a wedding, why, it would follow all of you a very long way. It would follow the bride. It would follow the match itself." Her eyes moved, just once, to the Duke, and away again. "Unless, of course, the matter can be resolved tonight." And the guilty party persuaded to withdraw. Quietly, before the constable arrives to make it a public thing. And there it was, laid out plain, as a seating plan. Withdraw, disappear, confess by fleeing, take the disgrace onto the plain sister's back, where a little more disgrace would scarcely show, and let the beautiful ones go free, and the match go forward, and the Duke turn his attention back where it belonged. Ruin by dawn, or ruin by flight, and either door opened onto the same dark room. Mrs. Wexford had built a trap with 2 doors, and she had built it well. Every eye in the ballroom was fixed on Marianne. She stood very still by the servants' door, and she felt the old instinct rise in her, the whole trained weight of a lifetime, telling her to lower her head and go, to spare her sister, to spare the family, to be the frame and not the picture even now, even here. Above all here. And then she thought of the small gold knot inside the clasp. Marianne Ashby did not lower her head. She walked forward instead, unhurried, into the middle of that great bright room, into the light, where she had not stood before these people or any others in the whole of her grown life, and the crowd drew back from her a little as she came, uncertain. Because a guilty woman does not walk toward her accusers, she walks away from them. "May I see the pearl?" she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried, and there was something in it, some quiet, settled authority earned in 1,000 hours of being the only competent soul in the room and never once thanked for it. And Mrs. Wexford's satisfied patience flickered, just slightly, because this was not the performance she had ordered. "You may look," said Mrs. Wexford, holding it higher, out of reach. "You may not touch it. It is the constable's evidence now." "Then I shall not touch it. I shall only ask the room to look at it along with me, since we are all gathered here, and since a lady's honor is surely worth the trouble of looking at a thing properly." She turned, slowly, to the 40 faces, and she found she was not afraid of them, which surprised her more than anything else that day. "Mrs. Wexford tells you these pearls were shed into my basket by careless handling, that I, the family's own seamstress, who cleaned and strung and settled these very pearls at my sister's throat this morning, was so clumsy or so wicked as to break the strand and hide a pearl among my papers. Very well, let us test it. Cordelia, sister, will you come here and bring the pearls with you?" Cordelia came, pale, trembling, the strand still clasped at her throat. Marianne did not touch her. She stood beside her in the light and spoke to the room. "These pearls came back from the jeweler with a cracked clasp when I was 17 years old," she said. "There was no money to send them a second time. So I mended the clasp with my own hands. And I did more than mend it. I worked a reinforcement within the clasp itself, in fine gold wire, in a shape of my own devising. A small knot, like a flower. I never told anyone, because no one ever asked me, and a person tells no one the things she is never asked. It has been there for 7 years. It is there now. And if you will turn the clasp toward the light," she nodded to Cordelia, who with shaking fingers turned the little gold clasp outward toward the branch of candles on the table, "you will see it. My hand, my mark. Made years before this wedding, before Mrs. Wexford ever set foot in this house, in a place no thief and no planter of false evidence could ever have known to imitate, for not a living soul has known it was there except me. A guest nearest the bride leaned in. Then another. There was a small sound, an indrawn breath, and the man closest, an elderly gentleman with a quizzing glass, Lord Bexley as it happened, said in a wondering voice, "By God, there is a knot. A little gold knot, worked in behind the catch itself. Plain as day, once a fellow knows where to look for it." "Now," said Marianne, and turned back to face Mrs. Wexford, and her voice did not rise, but it hardened, like iron going cold in the mold. "The pearl in your hand. If it came from this strand, it will match, not only in color, which any pearl of a certain age might do, but the thread knotted to it will match my stringing. I string in a double weaver's knot, always, in a waxed silk of a particular weight. It is a habit of my hands, as your signature is a habit of yours. My pattern book is in that very room where you say the pearl was found. Every strand I have ever worked is recorded in it, dated, with a sample of the thread pinned beside the entry. Send someone to fetch it. Compare the thread in your hand to the thread pinned on my page. If they match, then the pearl was cut from a strand I made with my own fingers. And I ask this room to consider carefully who has handled these pearls this fortnight, and who has not. I have not touched them," said Mrs. Wexford, a fraction too quickly. "No?" Marianne let the single word sit in the air. "You told us, not 2 minutes past, that you admired them this very morning. In whose room did you admire them? At what hour?" "My mother keeps them in her dressing case. Who was with my mother this morning, being so very kind and attentive to the mother of the bride, helping her to dress?" She let it hang, and she watched the color begin to leave the older woman's handsome face. "Your niece, Miss Vane, was in my mother's dressing room this morning. I saw her go in. I remember it because I remember everything. It is all I am good for, as you were kind enough to remind me 2 nights ago. And the pearl in your hand hangs from a thread that has been cut clean, not snapped. A strand that breaks by accident tears its thread ragged. This has been cut, with a small sharp blade, by a steady hand that meant to take exactly 1 pearl and no more, and to leave a length of thread still attached, so that it might be found in a certain basket and made to tell a certain story about a certain gray woman who had become inconvenient. They sent for the pattern book. It was the longest wait of Marianne's life. The room stood silent, the candles burning lower. 40 people, who had been ready to watch a spinster taken away by a constable, now not at all sure what it was they were watching, and Mrs. Wexford's handsome face slowly setting into something other than triumph. The Duke had not spoken through any of it. He stood at the side of the room with his arms folded and his gray eyes fixed on Marianne, and there was a look on his face that Marianne, had she been able to spare a single thought for it, would have known at once, because she had seen it once before across a pair of shears. A man watching the answer to a lifelong question walk toward him at last, in full daylight, and be everything he had hoped. The book came. Marianne opened it on the breakfast table before them all, to the page dated the summer she was 17, and there, pinned to the paper in her own neat script, was a sample of the waxed silk, a particular weight, a particular soft ivory shade, twisted in a particular way. Lord Bexley held the loose thread from Mrs. Wexford's pearl beside it, under his glass, and studied the two of them a good while, and then set the glass down on the linen with a small deliberate click. "It is the same thread," he said heavily, "the very same. And it is cut, not broken. The girl is right about that as well." He turned his old cold eyes on Mrs. Wexford. "The pearl came off this strand, and it was cut free deliberately by someone who knew where the work-basket sat." "Which anyone might have done," said Mrs. Wexford, but the carrying ease had gone out of her voice, including the seamstress herself, to construct exactly this theatrical little performance. This? No, said a new voice. It was Miss Sophronia Vane. The niece, the pale, sharp girl brought to London to catch a duke, who had stood white and rigid at her aunt's shoulder through the whole of it, and who now, perhaps because she was young, and the constable was truly coming, and it is one thing to plot the ruin of a stranger over a breakfast table, and quite another to watch the rope actually go around a neck, took one step away from her aunt and said, in a high frightened rush, "No, she didn't do it. I did. Aunt Wexford told me to. She gave me the little knife and told me exactly where to cut and where to put the pearl and the paper, and she said the gray one was in the Duke's way and it would be a kindness to everybody to have her sent off quiet before she, the girl put both hands over her face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She said no one would ever believe a seamstress over the two of us. She said no one ever believes a woman in gray. The silence after that was of an altogether different kind. Mrs. Wexford did not fall silent. Even then, her sort rarely does. She turned on her niece first, because it is always easier to turn on the weak. The child is hysterical, she said to the room, her voice climbing. She is overwrought. Weddings unstring a nervous girl. She scarcely knows what she is saying. She would confess to setting fire to St. Paul's if you pressed her hard enough. You cannot take the word of a frightened girl against a woman of my standing. I did not press her at all, said Marianne, quite gently. I named no one. I only described the cut of a thread and the hour of a morning. She named herself. And she named you. If she is so overwrought that she cannot be believed, madam, then how did she describe the very knife, and the very place, and the very reason, before any of us had said them aloud? Invention coaching. The two of you have plainly. When should I have coached her? Marianne turned her open hands to the room. I have been in this house a fortnight, and have not once been alone with Miss Vane. Ask any servant here where the Grey Sister has been every hour of every day, and they will tell you she has been in the workroom, because there is nowhere else I am permitted to be. You said yourself, not 10 minutes past, that I kept that room locked against all of you. Which is it, Mrs. Wexford? Was I sealed away plotting theft in a locked room? Or was I out coaching your niece to confess to it? You cannot have me guilty of both, for they are in 2 different rooms at the same hour, and even a woman of your standing cannot be in 2 places at once, nor make a seamstress do it. A low sound went round the guests, not quite a laugh. Worse than a laugh, it was the sound of 40 people watching a powerful woman caught in her own thread and beginning to see it draw tight. This is monstrous, said Mrs. Wexford, but her voice had thinned to something almost pleading. To be spoken to so, by a sewing woman. Yes, said Marianne, without heat. By a sewing woman who strings a double weaver's knot in a waxed ivory silk of a particular weight, and keeps a dated book of every strand she has ever worked, and remembers who went into a dressing room and at what hour, because remembering is what she keeps, instead of a great standing. It turns out, madam, that a sewing woman's small, careful facts are harder things to break than a great lady's fine, broad assurances. You built your case out of assurance. I built mine out of thread. Thread holds. Assurance does not. And she stopped, because there was nothing left in the older woman to answer with, and a merciful person does not go on striking after that. Marianne closed her pattern book. She did not smile. She did not turn to look at Mrs. Wexford, whose ruin was now complete and public and needed no help from her. She had learned long ago that there is no dignity to be had in watching your enemy fall. The dignity is in not needing to watch it. She simply stood there among them all, in her gray gown, with her book beneath her hand. Having proved with her own careful work and her own long, faithful memory the one thing that had never once been granted her in all her years, that she was, and had always been, telling the truth. "I think," said Lord Bexley into the quiet, "that when the constable arrives, there will be a matter for him to attend to after all, though not the one we were promised at the start of it." It was then that the Duke crossed the room to her. He did not hurry. He walked through the parted crowd to where Marianne stood, and he stopped in front of her, closer than was in any way proper, close enough that she had to lift her face to look up at him. And the whole ballroom held its breath to see what the coldest man in England would do next. "Miss Ashby," he said. His voice was low, but he did not trouble to lower it further. He meant to be heard by every soul in the room. "May I speak?" "You are a duke," she said. "You may do as you like. You always could. I find that is not true. I find there is one thing I have wanted to do for a fortnight and have not dared, and I mean to do it now, before all these people, so that it can never be taken back or explained away or turned into something smaller than it is." He drew a breath. "I came down the back stairs of this house 7 times, not for air, not by any accident. I came because in a house crammed full of people performing for me, you were the single soul who never once did it, who told me I was not cold, but hungry, who made me say my own name aloud for the first time in 12 years. I did not have a word for what that was. I have the word now. Your Grace." She said it low, a warning, aware of 40 faces, aware of her mother, aware of everything she had spent her whole life being aware of. "You must not here. Think what it will. It will be said that a duke chose a seamstress," he said. "Yes, let it be said. I have spent the whole of my life being chosen for what I have, by people who never once troubled to learn what I am, and I find that I would rather, just this once, do the choosing myself, out loud, in the light, and answer to no one for it afterward." He took her hand, her clever chalk-marked, ringless hand, and held it in both of his, warm, exactly as he had held it over the shears, only this time he did not take it away. "I choose you, Marianne, not the frame. You, not because it repairs your reputation, which needs no repairing. You have just repaired it before all of us, far more ably than I ever could. But because I want you. Because I have wanted you since the night you told me to leave a room I had no wish on earth to leave. Choose me back, or refuse me and send me up those stairs for good, but do it as yourself, not as anyone's frame. Never again as anyone's frame." The room did not breathe. And Marianne Ashby, who had resolved so many times to send him away, who had run the sums in the dark and found they always came out to her ruin, looked up into the gray eyes that were not cold and never had been, and she found that all her careful arithmetic had left out the one figure she had never once been permitted to enter into the sum, that she might be wanted, that she might be the one who chose, that the answer might, after everything, be simply yes. "I have spent 24 years," she said, and her voice carried now too, quiet and clear and entirely her own, being useful and being invisible and being content, or telling myself I was content, to be the reason a thing went well and to leave no mark of myself anywhere upon it. I never once asked for a single thing for my own self, because I did not believe there was anything to be had by the asking." She turned her hand over inside his and closed her fingers around his, deliberately, a stitch set in exactly the place she meant to set it. I am choosing something for myself now, in front of everyone, openly and without apology, as I was never before allowed to do. Yes, Alexander, I will have you. I choose you. And I mean to leave my mark on the whole of the rest of your life, in plain sight, where the world may see it, and not hidden away inside a clasp where no one ever thinks to look. He laughed, a startled, unguarded, boyish laugh, the laugh of a man who has not laughed freely in a dozen years. And he kissed her, there in the ballroom, before her white-faced mother, and her weeping sister, and the ruined Mrs. Wexford and old Lord Bexley with his quizzing glass, and every one of the 40 guests. And there was nothing chaste in it, nothing hidden, nothing done for anybody's benefit but their own. The constable came, in the end, and went away again, having taken careful notes and no seamstress at all. The elder Mrs. Wexford left London within the week, her ambitions for her niece and her son alike lying in pieces, having overplayed a strong hand at the worst possible table. The marriage of Cordelia and Mr. Wexford survived it, chiefly because the groom, mild and harmless as he had always been, had never much cared for his mother, and was privately relieved to see the back of her. Cordelia came to her sister that night after the guests had scattered, and wept, and begged forgiveness for the one terrible moment in which she too had not been quite sure, and Marianne forgave her, because Marianne had never in her life been good at anything but forgiving, and because she could afford to be generous now. And generosity comes easiest to those who have finally been given something of their own to be generous with. Mrs. Ashby had no idea how to speak to a daughter who was to be a duchess. She had spent so long fitting Marianne into a small gray space in the family sum that she had no figures at all left over for this. I only ever wanted. She began, several times, and never finished, and Marianne let her not finish, and kissed her mother's cheek, and understood that some accounts do not come out even, and that it is a kind of grace to stop trying to force them. 1 year later, in the deep quiet of an autumn evening, there was a fire lit in a room a very long journey from a back workroom with a single candle, and Marianne, Duchess of Harcourt, sat before it with her needle in her hand. She had not given up the sewing. She never would. It was not a thing done from need now, but a thing done from love, which is the only kind of doing that lasts a lifetime. She was working, that evening, on something very small, a little gown, ivory, no bigger than her own 2 hands, for the child that would come in the spring, the child her husband already swore would have her clever fingers, and, God willing, her stubborn honesty and, he always added, since he was permitted his one vanity, his own storm-gray eyes. She had worked a mark into the hem of it, in fine gold thread, a small knot like a flower, in a place only she would ever know to look, not because it must be hidden this time, but because some marks are private for the pure joy of them, and not for any shame. The Duke came in and stood behind her chair, as he had once stood in a low doorway, and looked down, not at the work, but at the woman doing it. "You are not resting," he said, "as the physician told you that you must." "I never rest. You knew as much when you chose me. It is far too late to complain of it now." Cordelia wrote again, he said. "A 3rd letter this month. She wishes to visit. She may visit. She is my sister, and a wedding is a long time gone, and I have grown far too happy to keep an account against anyone." Marianne turned the tiny gown to the light. She was frightened that day, and frightened people do frightened things, and I have been frightened most of my life, and did a great many small cowardly things myself. so I am poorly placed to hold her one loud moment against her forever. Let her come. Let her hold the baby. It will do her more good than it does me, and that is reason enough. You forgive very easily, for a woman who is so nearly ruined. I forgive easily because I was so nearly ruined, she said. It teaches a person how thin the ice is under everyone, even the cruel ones. Your Mrs. Wexford was only a frightened woman too, in the end frightened of being poor again, frightened of the rung below her. I do not excuse her. But I understand her, and understanding is a colder, kinder thing than hatred, and it costs me less to carry. I am not complaining. He put his hand over hers on the needle, warm and heavy and entirely still, and this time she did not hold her breath, because she had all the breath in the world now, and all the time, and nothing left over that needed pressing flat. I only wish to look at you. It remains my favorite occupation. It was the first honest one I ever had. You are a foolish man for a duke. I am the happiest fool in England, and I intend to remain one. He bent and said against her hair, quietly, I chose the frame, and I found she was the whole of the picture, and had been all along, and that everyone who ever looked past her was simply a fool with worse eyes than mine. She leaned back against him, and the fire settled with a soft collapse of embers, and somewhere in the great warm house that was a home now, a clock she had wound with her own hand ticked gently on toward morning, in no hurry at all. She thought, sometimes, of the woman in dove gray by the servant's door, who had believed her whole worth lay in going unseen. And she wished she could reach back across the year and tell her a single thing. Not that a duke would one day come. A duke is only a duke, and no woman's rescue. But that the mark she had hidden inside the clasp all those years before, the small stubborn proof that she was real and had left something of herself in the world, had never needed to stay hidden. That she was allowed, the whole time, to be seen. That the only person who had truly kept her invisible was herself, out of a fear she had long mistaken for humility. And that the moment she walked into the light and told the plain truth in her own carrying voice was the moment the whole of her real life had at last begun. It is a small thing, in the end, to be looked at, and it is everything there is. We spend so long, some of us, making ourselves useful in the dark, believing we must first disappear in order to be wanted, when the truth was always turned the other way round, that we are chosen not for how quietly we can vanish, but for the mark we are brave enough to leave where it can be seen. If you have sat with Marianne this whole evening here by our fireside, then let me leave you with the one question that stayed with me longest, and I would dearly love to read your answer in the comments below. When you think of your own life, and of the quiet, faithful work you have done that no one ever saw, would you rather be remembered as the one who kept everything running unseen, content to hold the frame, or would you, like Marianne, step at last into the light and let the world see the mark that was always yours? Tell me which, and tell me why. And if this story has warmed you tonight, then you know what to do. Subscribe and stay a while longer with us by the hearth, for there is always another tale coming soon, and the fire is always lit for you here.